Let's pay a visit to Mark's True Crime Corner.
This is not a good neighborhood. I'm scared.
Now, here's your host, Mark Thompson.
And we're joined by Courtney, and that good-looking gentleman that you see in the on the upper right box is the senior deputy attorney, who's the former senior deputy district attorney, and involved in the homicide unit, also the ABC News legal analyst, and he has written a book. It's the Book of Murder. He is Matt Murphy, everybody.
Yeah.
Now, I should say it's a prosecutor's journey through love and death is the subheading. And you can see how Matt Murphy could offer a whole new perspective on that which we talk about here every week.
Definitely.
Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is really a world, and it must be on some level for you, just in general, kind of remarkable to watch the way this world of murder investigations and true crime has exploded over the last 20 years.
Sure has. And it's, from my perspective, I think it's a good thing. I have some ideas why that's happening, but it sure is interesting to be a part of it.
Now, your area of work is Southern California, Laguna Beach, Newport Beach, Costa Mesa. These are Orange County is the area. And so you saw, I would imagine, through this period, all kinds of different sorts of murder investigations take place. What would be the thing, if I can, and then Courtney, I'll shut up and I'll let you talk to Matt.
Finally.
Yeah. What would be the thing that we might be most surprised by that, that those of us who kind of take this in on a retail basis may not really be aware of?
So Orange County does things a little bit differently, Mark. What you see on TV is you see this assembly line approach to murder, which is the way most DA's offices do it, where one DA will review the case, the detectives investigate on their own, then they put it on somebody's desk, and then one DA reviews it, another does the preliminary hearing, and it goes to somebody else for the trial. Orange County is a little different. It's a vertical system. So what happens when you go into a specialized unit like homicide is you get assigned a patch or a part of the county. So my cities were Newport Beach, Laguna, Newport, and Irvine, or Newport, Laguna, Irvine, and Costa Mesa, sorry. And they, any murder that happens in those cities are automatically assigned to me for the 17 years I was there. So I would roll out with my investigator in the middle of the night, walk through the scenes. Right after we'd file charges, when it was appropriate to do so, I'd meet with the family. I'd give them my personal cell. And the word vertical means basically it's my case, and I would follow it all the way up. I decide when there's enough evidence, who to charge. And so you get this really good constructive working relationship with your detectives and the cities, and you do one murder case after another. And in places like Newport, murders are pretty rare, but when they happen, they tend to be kind of twisted and rather spectacular. So I saw some really interesting stuff and decided to share some of that in my book.
Yeah, the book looks super intriguing, and we had a link to it before. We'll have a link under this video, the Book of Murder. It's interesting, too, you talk about these cases. Two things jumped out at me, when you give the victim's family and those who are critical to the case, your personal cell phone. I mean, I think that just speaks volumes for, who you are and the connection you must feel to victims. And the other thing that jumps out at me is just looking at your track record. I mean, you never lost a case, I don't think.
Well, I lost a couple of misdemeanors badly back when I first started my first bar fight.
No, I'm talking about as a homicide prosecutor.
Yeah, sorry, those misdemeanors still sting. When I started in homicide, you work up. So Orange County, it takes years before they give you anything really heavy. And then I went to sexual assault first for 4 years. So I had a pretty good wealth of experience trial-wise under my belt before I got to homicide. And then that system I explained, where you decide what charges are going to be on your cases, you really shouldn't be losing too many, because you're there from the very beginning. You can you don't control the investigation, but you can certainly guide it in a way to ensure the constitutional rights of the defendant and to make sure things are done right to the greatest degree that you can. So by the time you're in there in front of a jury, you should be winning most of those. And the numbers look good, but it should work that way most of the time. So
Well,
I never lost a homicide.
You're, I think, quite modest to kind of put it in that context, because I read all the time about these guys skating, who shouldn't. I mean, it seems almost every day that I open the paper, I'm reading about these investigations and trials that go awry. When you talk about all of these different kinds of crimes, I mean, these sex crimes and these murders, I can't even watch the. Which one is the sex crime one? The Law and Order SVU?
Yeah, SVU.
I can't even watch it, man. I can't. And it takes a special both empathy on your part, because you're obviously sympathetic and empathetic to those involved. But it also you have to compartmentalize, I would think, because otherwise you'll get, you'd be like me and unable to even, I can't go and I can't look at the crime scene. I mean, it would be antithetical to what you're doing, to your strategy as a prosecutor. How do you reconcile those, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, and the answer is not very well for me. I was really bad at doing exactly what you're talking about, and I talk about that a little bit in the book. You get into homicide, and I rotated in when I was 33, and so I was real young, and I didn't have the mental bandwidth to be able to do that balance that so many of my colleagues were able to do, where they're like doing Little League on the weekends and awesome husbands and fathers and all that, and then being really good trial lawyers at the same time. I kind of went all in on the trial work, and so I surfed a lot to try to balance it out. Sometimes that works. Sometimes all you do is sit in the water and obsess about your cases. But it's interesting right now, Mark. Like, writing a book like that after I retired from the office in 2019, it was almost cathartic in a way to just sort of go through that and think through it. Trying to get a little more balance going in my life these days. But yeah, back when I was in the unit, I was all in. You're on call 24/7. You get that call in the middle of the night, and you got to go. You go down with your investigator, and you're there at 3 a.m, shivering, waiting for the search warrants to come back from the night judge. And but the truth is, I loved it, and I still miss it every day, as twisted as that might sound. It was absolutely fascinating to get into that. And yes, I always gave my personal cell phone out, because I wanted the families to know that there was at least, and my team was composed of wonderful people that really cared, and I wanted the families to know that. So,
no, that's so cool. I mean, it's just it does reflect your connection to and I would think that what drew you to it is when you say you miss it, and when you talk about it, I can tell you kind of speak about it with a zeal that is reflected, I'm sure, in the work you did. And that must have been associated with wanting to right this wrong as best you could, like bring some justice to this situation. That has to be an insanely motivating factor.
Well, you're absolutely right. And look, when you go to the scene as a prosecutor and you see that person either dead on a kitchen floor, dead in a ditch, or on the autopsy table, and then you meet with that person's mother, and fathers and husbands and all that. But I don't know what it was about the moms, but the moms got to me every single time. And when you're up at 2 a.m. in the middle of trial, and you got 3 more hours of work to do, but you're exhausted, that motivates you quite a bit, and you connect with those poor people. And most people don't know how important that sense of justice really is to a family that has lost a loved one to murder, unless, God forbid, they wind up there themselves. You know what I mean? And I really I don't know. It's kind of hard to. It sounds cheesy to say, but I was really for my first murder scene, I kind of felt like I belonged there, as weird as that sounds. Working with those detectives, late into the night, and you see so many people behind the scenes, which was another reason for me writing the book, that don't get the credit. And law enforcement has been going through some tough times these days. A lot of detectives and police officers, as we know, and we've all experienced that. The vast majority of them really are some of the hardest working, most dedicated people I've ever met in my life. And Of course, there's bad cops too, and nobody hates a bad cop more than a good one. But I wanted to write the book to talk about some of the forensic scientists that are behind the scenes, and like my paralegal and the detectives and the DA investigators that restored my faith just a little bit. You start with the worst thing you can see, which is some poor dead child or somebody's child, whether an adult or an actual child, and you immediately see these professionals showing up in the middle of the night without complaint, these detectives that are up for 18 hours straight without complaining. And I wanted to share some of that in the book to kind of give people the behind the scenes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I note that I've been dominating with all these questions. Rain says in the chat, isn't this Courtney's segment? I am sorry, Courtney.
No. I mean, I think you're asking really important questions, and these are questions that I would have asked as well. And the book does go into different, I don't know how to say it, like the taxonomy, like the different types of murders, right? And gang related and sort of wealthy family, financial beneficiaries, sort of that's their motivation. And it was really interesting to read about these different cases and the different profiles of these suspects and the way that you would prosecute them. Even the cold cases is really interesting as well, because you've got a case that happens and then over time you revisit it, and within that revisit some of the evidence. So
well, Matt, you've worked on some high-profile cases. I mean, maybe you could. I know one that
the dating game killer. Bill McLaughlin was another case that I was familiar with, and it was really interesting for you to outline that, especially because, well, now I'm talking too much, but that the murder happened in 1994, and I believe that you arrested them in like 2009, the two suspects. Yeah, so that as well, 15 years later. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I volunteered to be one of the two cold case deputies in the unit after a little while, and that was fascinating. I mean, working it behind the scenes is truly every bit as fascinating as it looks at from the outside. You dust off these old boxes in the storage room of these police departments, and you roll up your sleeves and you get into it. And those cold cases, there's two kinds really. You get the DNA hit kind, the answers are finally delivered to the family and you know who did it. But there's another kind of cold case, and that's when the family or the detectives always knew who did it, but there was, the DA at the time felt like there just wasn't enough evidence. And those ones are, in a way, they're the most interesting to work because it's a new set of eyes and you're trying to find something in addition to what was sort of refused at the time. And if you get a bunch of pros on that and they're dedicated to it, you can almost always find that hit, test that one piece of evidence that wasn't tested back in the day, or, and the satisfaction there is you get a family, especially with the nice victims, that was denied justice. And you got some killers that got away with it. And there was an immense satisfaction that comes along with reaching back in time and having your detectives handcuff somebody that murdered somebody back in the day and got away with it. And I was very, very privileged and fortunate to have worked on a few of those. But yeah, there's different kinds. A child abuse death is totally different than a gang murder. And fortunately, we let most of those, stay with the gang unit. But a serial killer is a totally different kind of case than a murder for money or a conspiracy, which is all different than a 7-Eleven robbery gone wrong. So they each wind up with the death of a human being, but the background and the investigation you have to do is so different. It's almost kind of a different crime in a way. And you start recognizing patterns and working with your detectives to go back and look for the things like, the serial killers collect trophies, for example, and people that conspire to murder for money usually can't wait to spend it. So they usually have appointments made with real estate agents and stuff before the murder even happens. So you learn along the way, and it takes a long time, but I loved it. And like I said, I still miss it every day.
Yeah.
The Dirty John case he was involved in, I believe, as well. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Dirty John. That was fascinating. That was one where it was a homicide that happened in Newport, and the investigation led us to sometimes it's the job of the prosecutor to exonerate somebody from any sort of criminal wrongdoing. We got to do that in that case, and it was such a fascinating story. I called my friend Chris Goffard with the LA Times, and I'm like, dude, you gotta take a look at this one. And I thought he'd write an article about it, and instead he turned it into this international sensation, for which I should probably say I got all the sliders I could eat at the premiere, and that was it. And I
didn't make you a wealthy man. Yeah.
It did not. Gave me a full stomach for one night though. But yeah, I did the Dating Game Killer was one of mine. Anna Kendrick has a new movie coming out on Netflix on that, so I got to consult a little bit on that, which was super cool. You know, meeting somebody that famous and that Hollywood talented, and that was really interesting for me. I also was the Orange County prosecutor on the Golden State Killer case, although I'm going into that in my next book that we're already working on the proposal for. But yeah, I got to do some pretty high profile cases. The Samantha Runyon case that you might remember. Tom and Jackie Hawks, that couple that got tied to the anchor and thrown off their boat. Yeah, there it is. Anna Kendrick, who, by the way, is every bit, she is so nice in real life. And I'll tell you what, that actor was, in my view, absolutely phenomenal. That guy nailed it. And he just has this, I've been lucky enough to see this movie ahead of time. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but that guy did such a good job of playing Rodney Alcala. Rodney represented himself, so I personally had to deal with him. My trial partner and I, Gina Satriano from the LA DA's office. So he represented himself a la Ted Bundy. And so we'd have to go into court and talk to him and, as if he was another lawyer, because technically he was. And it was just fascinating. There's my boy right there. That's Rockin' Rodney in trial. Why he grew his hair out, I don't know, but he did. He was a certified Mensa level genius. He had a genius level IQ, grew up in a loving home. The guy was a varsity letterman in high school, worked on the yearbook committee, had girlfriends, had friends. And that's one of the fascinating things I learned in homicide is that serial killers, I thought they were all like Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs and, like creepy guy in a van. Turns out they tend to be handsome. They tend to be intelligent, they tend to be arrogant. And they often have a complete dearth of any sort of real abuse, believe it or not. It's sort of contrary to popular myth. A lot of them do it because they like to do it. And,
so as he would present to society, there'd be nothing about him, even in his adult life, that seems like there's a screw loose.
That is exactly right, Mark. And that's one of the things that makes these guys, in my experience, even scarier than what we see in the movies, because they, the example I've used before is they could be in front of you in line in Starbucks and you'd never know. We want to think that, the hairs on the back of our neck would stand up or we would be able to identify them. And the reality is they blend in perfectly. I think that's why Jack the Ripper got away with it, because he was able to go into Whitechapel, London and blend in perfectly. And that's the real, that's the way they usually are. And I think that's even more fascinating. You look at a recent arrest, Rex Heuermann in New York, and of course he's presumed innocent, but that's the Go-Go Beach murder, which is fascinating to me because that guy had a way, he was wrapping his victims in burlap. He figured out a way to defeat a lot of the modern forensic techniques used to identify people. And they actually made that with mitoDNA, where they were hairs, not nuclear DNA, which is really, it's fascinating if you ever studied serial killers, because, and that guy, he ran an architecture firm, founded and operated an architecture firm in Midtown Manhattan. That's the real thing with these guys is they are, they're genuine psychopaths, tend to be charming, tend to be smart, and that's one of the things that's so interesting. At least
crazy that they have these full lives and they still have time to, stake out of some murder and be a serial killer. Oh my God!
Yep,
crazy.
Yeah.
I don't have enough time for my fantasy football league. These guys are, it's crazy.
It's priorities. Really.
Yeah, it's priorities. I see. Anything else for Matt before I've been so intrigued.
I know. Well,
the book sounds really great.
I wanted to ask you about your personal security, and did you ever feel a sense of concern about any of these cases that you prosecuted? And
I had a couple of scary ones. I had a terminally ill father of Skylar De Leon. He was the That was the man that was responsible for the murder of Tom and Jackie Hawks off their boat. And his father had a terminal illness, and he'd been to federal prison, and I got what's called a terror-stop warning. He told his psychiatrist that he wanted to kill me on his way out. So this is a guy with nothing to lose. And that wasn't a threat directly to me, so we couldn't really do anything about it. But I also had the case of Hussein Nairi. That was the guy that wasn't even a murder. They kidnapped a marijuana dispensary owner and sexually mutilated him in the desert. And then he fled back to his native country of Iran, and we extradited him. He escaped from the jail and left my photo on his bunk. So he was in the wind.
Wow.
And but you know what? The thing is, I didn't, because of that sort of lack of balance in my life, I never got married. I never had kids. And so I didn't really have anybody to protect except for myself, and I think there's a real difference there. It's scary, but not in the same way that it would have been if I had people that I actually, was responsible for, if that makes sense. So you get threats, but I, got a good lock on my door, and I haven't had any actual issues. But
the Menendez drama that's being played out on Netflix, I think it is. They're retelling the Menendez story. There's a lot of this now. I mean, Courtney and I watch a lot of this stuff where it's dramatic retelling. That O.J. Simpson story, is told again dramatically. And anyway, the Menendez is the latest. It's very popular. It's pretty fascinating because I remember at the time thinking, it's open and shut. As you say, the kids, they killed this is the part that, as you say, they bought a Rolex after they seemed to buy an expensive car, whatever it was, after their parents were murdered. It seemed to me that there weren't any extenuating circumstances that could lead to an acquittal or even questions around their guilt. Still, though, and now this gets to the point that I wanted to ask you as a prosecutor, still, the defense was able to raise the notion that they were victims of abuse in their home, and it led to this. So that's the summary for those who don't know. My question is, what were your impressions, both at the time when this was going down and we were hearing these arguments, and also as you watch these dramatic depictions of these cases that are so well known?
Well, so the Menendez case went down right when I was beginning my career, and I followed it religiously back in the time. And I actually wound up having a case against David Cohen. He was the second prosecutor after they hung it the first time. And as a law clerk, we had Lester Kuriyama. He was one of the original prosecutors on the case. We had one of his cross-examinations of Eric Menendez up actually in the clerk room of the Orange County DA's office as an example of how to do a really good cross-examination. And what has sort of been lost with time, and I see everybody getting really excited about this, and Lyle and Eric Menendez lied over and over and over again. They lied upside down, they lied sideways, they lied diagonally, they lied repeatedly. And this quote unquote new evidence that they're talking about is a letter written by Eric in the time leading up to the shotgun slaying of his mother. And it's like, now we believe him. And look, I've done conspiracy cases to kill for money. Leaving a false trail of evidence is always a part of those plans. And these guys couldn't wait to spend the money. And what's interesting to me, and I kind of yell at my TV a little bit these days, watching that stuff. And look, it's not my case. I haven't read through the files. So this is just objectively what I've seen, but through the lens of having prosecuted a bunch of these, is that under California law, if you are motivated in part by revenge or bad blood and, or whatever, but also you're motivated in part by murder for financial gain, you are guilty of the special circumstance of murder for financial gain. And you could have 90%. I was abused as a kid, which I don't believe in their case, actually. And let me just segue into that for a second. I spent 4 years in the Orange County Sexual Assault Unit. I did well over 1,000 child molest cases in my time there, where you're either reviewing or in some way trying those. I have never seen a case, nor have I ever heard of a case, where a bio mom or a biological mother in conjunction with the biological father was sexually abusing two teenage boys. Never once have I seen it. Never once have I read about it. And I, considering this information comes from two of the biggest liars in California jurisprudence, I don't believe them. Kitty Menendez did not molest her boys. I absolutely don't believe that. And the jury rejected that, I think, twice. So this is one of those things it gets under my skin a little bit, because you've got people who are like, oh, sexual assault is bad. And 32 years later, we have a letter written by one of the guys who lied through his teeth. And from my point of view, the only thing worse than the shotgun slaying of your own mother is coming back later and saying, I did it because she sexually abused me. Sorry, I call BS on that. And look, if they ever got a new trial, I'll tell you this, Mark, I would love to be the prosecutor on their retrial. And I'll tell you what, in front of a rational jury, I'd convict those two guys again. So that, not to go down a mini rant there, but it frustrates me, because a lot of people have been sexually abused. A huge percentage of the population have been the victims of sexual abuse. And the idea that those two guys are trying to cash in to, gain some sort of status by people who were legitimately abused by their parents. And again, at best, if I'm wrong about all that, these were two adult men who went back knowing that they were going to financially benefit from this and took shotguns to their parents. I'm sorry, I have zero sympathy for them. So those are my thoughts.
No, it's great to have you weigh in on it, because there is a way in which these dramatic retellings can varnish over a lot of the information and facts that either we weren't aware of or that have just been sort of dulled to time, and that's fascinating. It really is. Courtney, anything else from Matt? That's fascinating, though. It really is. I especially since this genre is so hot, more and more cases you've worked on and cases you're familiar with, they're all going to be retold. Not literally all of them, but many of them in these dramatic ways, because they, on some level, they land in such an interesting way with so much of the public that just has this natural curiosity for this genre. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the rant, guys. That's one of those. It fires me up when I look at that case.
Yeah.
No, I just
I think you have a unique perspective because of your background. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Let me just see. Look at sure enough, that Menendez thing brings people out of the woodwork.
Oh, it would, and that's going to upset some of your fans, no doubt.
No.
But, I stand by every word of that.
Killers lied? No. They may have been psychologically injured by money being thrown at them. That's a sarcastic remark by Blue Spark. Wes says, but Matt, there is a new witness that came forward, an ex-Menudo member that claimed the father molested him on several occasions. So I don't know anything about that. But the point, more than anything, is not about the father molesting anybody. It's about molesting those kids, whether those kids were molested, those two teenage boys, as you say. So, yeah, you make a very compelling case for the fact that it's garbage. Anything?
No, I'm incredibly
Matt
grateful
Murphy's,
for you coming today.
He's your dream man.
I know. This is going to be an awkward segue.
The book is The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death, Matt Murphy. Mm-hmm. And this legendary lawyer writes it all out. And it is available now. In fact, there's a link underneath this video, and there'll be a link underneath the breakout video. And I believe there is there's a website too. Didn't you have it up there?
Yeah, thebookofmurder.com.
Yeah, thebookofmurder.com. Mm-hmm. So we'll have that underneath the video. There it is, the book of it. We have it up, and you can pick it up that way too. Wow, Matt, what an interesting guy you are. You've worked on so many important cases, and the work you've done with all the cases that you've been involved in is so very important for society. My hat's off to you, man. Thebookofmurder.com. Again, we have it up there. We'll have a link under the video. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, great stuff. Matt Murphy, everybody. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
True Crime Corner for today.
True Crime Corner, only on The Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.